On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, Trevor Zegras re-ups with the Anaheim Ducks. Plus, we tackle some big questions for the Arizona Coyotes. And San Jose, what exactly would you say you do here? We discuss that and more on today's episode, so let's get started.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into a Western Conference Tuesday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure, if you haven't already, that you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the course of the week. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, we dive into the Trevor Zegras contract. We'll take a look at the Arizona Coyotes and whether they have done enough to make the postseason, and we will try to figure out the course of whatever it is the San Jose Sharks are doing. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and joined by my Tuesday co-host, Nick Morgan of Locked On Predators. And continuing our big questions series, we've got 4 teams left, so we're cutting it in half, 2 this week and 2 next week, just coincidentally leading up to the start of the NHL season. And so we timed that out perfectly, which I knew it would work out just really nice. But
we were debating hard whether Anaheim and San Jose deserve like a full owned segment, or whether we could just say like, yeah, these teams suck. Have a good season.
I mean, it is going to be a battle to determine which team rises to the top. But I don't know that it's a list that you necessarily want to rise to the top of. But we'll tackle that in a little bit. The Anaheim Ducks, who will tackle their questions next week, they did make some news earlier this week over the weekend because Trevor Zegras had not signed yet with the Ducks, and this was kind of starting to drag close to the season, a little too close to comfort. But nonetheless, they got it done. It's a 3-year deal for Zegras. He ends up making $5.75 million per season. He will be a restricted free agent after the 2025-2026 season. And so Zegras back in Anaheim for 3 more seasons. Nick, what do you think of the deal?
It is a deal for Trevor Zegras. I will say that a cheap deal when you consider some of the money being thrown around to 22 and 23-year-olds this year. I know your boy Matt Boldy just signed for, I think, around $7 million AAV. Dylan Cousins up in Buffalo signed for $7 million AAV. Troy Terry, who is older and has had fewer points than Trevor Zegras the past 2 years, signed for $7 million. I don't know, Seth. Like, this seems like a deal that Trevor Zegras just kind of went like, you know what? I just want to play. I'm not happy about the way this is going. This isn't the end in sight, but I want to get back on the ice. I'm not sure this is like a deal that Trevor Zegras, he's going to do like press conferences and stuff and be like, yeah, happy that it worked out. Happy to be back in Anaheim. Deep down, I don't think he's going to be happy with the final numbers of this deal, especially given some of the other contracts flying around in the NHL, especially given some of the other contracts on his own team. He's making with the $500,000 less than Alex Killorn is going to be making. I mean, he's making less than Anthony Mantha this season. He is making all of these players, Ryan Pulock, Travis Sanheim, all players who are going to be making significantly more money than Trevor Zegras. Yeah, if I'm Zegras camp, I'm not thrilled with how this worked out.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what the language looks like. I'm sure it was colorful, but if I'm in the Zegras camp, I say something to the effect of, we're going to remember this when it comes time for that next deal, because Zegras will be 25 when this one is done, and depending on how he produces over these next 3 years, and I don't think there's any dispute. I know I've seen some questions thrown out on Twitter as to whether or not Zegras is a franchise player. He is a productive player, to say the least. He's a young center that is certainly worthy of the money that has been thrown around, like you said, on his own team. But if I'm his agent, I say we're going to remember this come the next time that we negotiate for a deal, and you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt this next time. We're going to be looking for, I don't know, 8, 9, somewhere in that range, and that seems like a crazy number to throw out. But then again, Troy Terry's making 7.
Yeah. Yeah, and you look at Trevor Zegras was second on his team in scoring as a rookie 2 years ago, 61 points as a 20-year-old. Last year led the team in scoring. So, I mean, it's just one of these things where it feels like he is in that category of franchise players. I mean, you and I talked about it, Seth, when we're ranking like some of the best players in the West. He's constantly in like the discussion of best players under 23, best up and coming players. He's got that sort of dynamic must watch skill. I mean, he was on the cover of NHL 23 for goodness sakes, just because of some of his highlight reel goals and his performance in like the All-Star games and stuff like that. So, I mean, it seems like he's not just a franchise player, but he's somebody with star like power. And it's wild to me that with the $1 billion in cap space that the Anaheim Ducks have, this is a team that was struggling to even hit the cap floor this year.
Right.
That they wouldn't just say, screw it, let's give Trevor Zegras at least $7 million for 3 years. And then it's a bridge deal. Then if he's a franchise player, what at the time when we kind of expect to be good, then maybe we can start talking about, okay, let's see if he's worth franchise money. But I don't get this from the Anaheim Ducks perspective. And as you mentioned, the Trevor Zegras camp, okay, we'll remember this. Yeah, I mean, 3 years from now, they may be more adamant about playing hardball at a time where the Ducks, hey, maybe they are going to be in a position to compete. And I think that's going to be, come back to bite them a little bit.
Yeah, there just doesn't seem to be a reason to try to kind of get a deal done on the cheap at this point with where he is going to be headed. It seems like it has massive potential to backfire later on, and I'm just going to be fascinated to see how this plays out in 3 years when his now current deal is done, and it comes time to try to figure out what the next deal looks like, because congratulations, you may have just put yourself in a situation where now it costs you a couple million extra, as opposed to simply giving him 7, like he probably should have gotten in the first place.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, this feels like this has the potential to go very, very sideways very fast, but who knows? That's 3 years from now. Maybe we're having this conversation again in 3 years about what Trevor Zegras' worth is.
Yeah, a lot can happen in 3 years. A lot can happen in a year. A lot can happen in a 24-hour span. Time is just, you can get a lot done in a short amount of time. So we'll see how this plays out. We'll see how Zegras performs with this new deal. And we'll talk a little more about Anaheim coming up on next week's show. But for today, we're going to talk about a team that I think both of us are very excited to see, because they made a ton of moves in the offseason. They have been on the lower end of the standings forever. Is this the time for the Arizona Coyotes to finally make a push in the Western Conference? We'll discuss as we continue today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. There is nothing worse than trying to find tickets to watch your favorite team, especially with the NHL season right around the corner. And you either find tickets that are super expensive, have terrible sight lines, or you just don't find anything at all. But thankfully, Game Time is here to make your day of ticket buying experience absolutely stress free. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports, plus music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On NHL podcast. Again, a Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan finishing our big questions for every team in the Western Conference. Two of them today, and we'll finish with the final two teams. You can probably guess where we're at in the standings right now, coming up next week. So the Arizona Coyotes get their chance, and after bringing in Jason Zucker, Matt Dumba, Nick Bugstead is back. Some savvy vet moves for an Arizona team that has a very intriguing young forward group. My big question for Arizona this year is, are those moves going to be enough for them to finally make some noise in the Western Conference?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, and the Coyotes, of course, kind of put out some promotional material that kind of hinted at, hey, we're actually gonna try to make a playoff push this year. And you know what? It's gonna be tough to tell because it's totally dependent on how well those veteran players do. Matthew Dumba, of course, very solid defenseman for the Wild for a number of years. I also really love the addition of Sean Dursey on the blue line. He's somebody that I think played a big role in why LA was so good in front of their own net last year. Jason Zucker up front, that was another, underrated one that must have just had a field day with former Wild players in Arizona for some reason. And then you add that to the fact that you have, why can't I remember his name right now?
Clayton Keller.
Clayton Keller. I was wanting to say Kyle Connor, and then I want to say Connor Garland. And I knew both of those were wrong. But yeah, Clayton Keller, can't remember his name, but one of the most underrated players in the league. I mean, this is a guy that scored 80 points last year. Yeah, it seems like with better teammates around him, somebody that can kind of elevate himself into a 100-point guy. And then you add in the Logan Cooley factor. I mean, this guy looked so good as a freshman in college last year. The only reason I don't think people talked about him more was because he happened to be playing in the same conference as Adam Fantilli, who was even better freshman. But Logan Cooley is an NHL caliber forward. Has the tools to be a star in this league. He's making his debut this year. And as we saw in some of the preseason games, like he's NHL ready. Like this isn't just, a guy that's going to come in and, sort of be on the fourth line, kind of figure things out as he go. Like he has the tools to jump in, be a top six player right away and make some noise. So there's certainly some excitement in Arizona, but I also think a lot of questions as well.
Yeah, and it's a situation too where you look at what this Coyotes team has done over the last few seasons. 28, 40, and 14 last year. 2 years ago they were 25, 50, and 7. And so even just from one year to the next, you find a way to get a few more games into overtime. Yes, you still lose them, but you find a way to get the game into OT, which is progress in and of itself. And it seems like they feel like they've got the right guy behind the bench leading this group. They feel like, they've got good people in the front office to guide the overall direction. It really does feel like amongst those other teams that are kind of down at the bottom of the barrel fighting for space to the top, it really does feel like Arizona has positioned themselves to start to stack next steps up as they work their way back up to the top. Because, you go back to even back to 2011, 2012, they were 42, 27, and 13. So it's not like they have been terrible forever. I mean, they won 50 games in 2009. So it's
Right.
like there's a good base for this franchise. It's just that, to kind of fully sift through the rebuild, you have some lean years, and they've had those now, and now is the time for them to build the wins up and start to make some big splashes here in the Pacific first and then the West.
Yeah. And they're interesting because this is a team that, they feel like they're ready to take the next step. If I'm an Arizona fan, I am just happy with maybe even being like, within the first two teams out of the postseason. Maybe be right on the edge and just kind of realizing like, you're still a few players away. That to me would be a big step for Arizona because it seems like they have been front and center of they're the team that's going to tank, like they're going to tank for Bedard. They're going to suck and then save all their money to sign Austin Matthews. They're going to be in the conversation for the number one pick. Their goal is to try to be as bad as possible. It seems like that's been the conversation for most of the past few years, but this is also a team and a franchise that really needs something to kind of build around right now. And the other thing, and a big reason that I'm cheering for the Coyotes to maybe make a playoff run this year, how fun would a playoff game at Mullet Arena be? Can you imagine that atmosphere? Like, I just want to see, playoff hockey in like a D1 college hockey rink. Like, I just want to see that happen so bad. I think it's just going to be so much fun. Again, like I do think I don't know if the Coyotes have enough to make it happen this year. I think they're maybe, a couple of years away, maybe another year or two until some of their young players really get going. But I'll tell you, they have tools to build around. And this is a team that, as long as they can continue on the right path, they can make some noise.
Yeah, I think the big thing for Arizona this year and next year is to gain ground on the teams that are clearly above them in the standings, but create some separation from those teams that are below them in the standings. The Anaheims, the San Jose's, the Chicagos, is get yourself up towards that group of teams that are fighting for postseason positioning. And so, as you alluded to for this year, it may be that they're 1 or 2 years away still. If you can go out there and have they had 70 points last season. If you can have like an 80-point season this year or, 85, somewhere in there, I think you feel really good about that as a fan of the Coyotes, as people that are working for the Coyotes. But at the end of the day, it will be lightning in a bottle, I think, that will get this team kind of to where it wants to go. Is you're going to have that year where they just really overachieve compared to what they're supposed to do or what people expect them to do. And then that's just going to start kind of the run for them of now we're a playoff team because we did it last year. So now we get back to the playoffs again and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and this is a team that you kind of want to see that happen to.
Mm-hmm.
You just want to see hockey succeed in Arizona. I remember growing up and seeing those old Coyotes games with Keith Tkachuk, Jeremy Roenick, Rick Tocchet, and just how wild of an atmosphere some of those games were. I even remember, the wild atmosphere, in 2012 when they played the Preds, and, just how insane seeing that crowd on TV was. I would absolutely love to get that atmosphere back. So, yeah, hopefully the Coyotes can take a step forward.
Time will tell. Speaking of our next team, it's going to be a while before we see a step forward, I think, for them. And so we'll finish today's episode just kind of talking through what is next. Where are we going with San Jose? What are the Sharks building towards? What would you say you do here? We'll discuss all that as we finish today's episode of Locked On NHL after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, you can snap in to the NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And that's because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props. How many passing yards is Kirk Cousins and Ryan Tannehill going to have? Touchdowns is Derrick Henry going to have? Over-unders on point totals, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Final segment of today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, thank you for making the Locked On NHL podcast your first listen each and every day. Make sure that you get all of your podcast platforms. Follow us everywhere because the NHL season is kicking off next week. So make sure you don't miss out on anything that is going on in the NHL by staying up to date with the absolutely A-plus panel for Locked On NHL every day of the week. All right. The San Jose Sharks are not going to be good this year. I feel like I'm doing like the Maury Povich paternity test. You are not going to be good this season. And to be fair for San Jose, they're still kind of in teardown mode in their rebuild, so they haven't gotten to those foundational levels yet. But again, this is what we see with every team that does this. There are lean seasons until you get to the bottom and start to work your way back up.
Yeah, and that seems like that's what it's going to be for San Jose. I mean, the one thing that was keeping them from being an absolutely terrible team last year was Erik Karlsson, and now he, of course, is in Pittsburgh, and that was sort of the last gasp of okay, there's an actual dynamic NHL player on our roster, and I'm looking at the roster right now, and it's just who's even like the young players to build around right now. Our boy JD absolutely loves him. A couple of the young players loves him. Thomas Bordelot. But it's just like, have we really seen enough of kind of the younger guys to really step up and kind of prove that they're players worth building around? I don't know if we have yet from San Jose. So it's going to be, I think it's sort of a rough year. And as you mentioned, like it's a situation where it just feels like there's still some bottoming out to do. And that feels like that's what this is going to be for San Jose this year. And it's interesting because there are some decent, additions, at least on paper, to the lineup. You brought in Anthony Duclair, who was, a very dynamic player with Florida. Mikael Granlund is sort of an interesting pickup. So, there's some veteran names on this team that they got in the offseason, but it's just, it's just not enough to make them even remotely compatible across an 82 game season.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario for San Jose, because all of those guys are impending free agents. Mikhail Granlund will be actually, no, he's got this year and next year at
Thanks, Thanksgiving,
5 million
Doyle.
a season. Well, Duclair is going to be a free agent after the season is done. You've got Nico Sturm is signed for 2 more seasons. I think the Sharks, I don't want to speak for the Sharks, but I think they like what they have there. What you want to have happen is some of these guys that are impending free agents to play really well on a bad team, enough that somebody at the trade deadline comes calling and says, "Hey, I'd like so and so," and you can get something back in return for those guys. Duclair, I think, is a perfect example of that potential, because you could flip him to a playoff team at the deadline, and he would be a huge impact for whatever team that would end up being.
Yeah.
And then you get something back in return. I think that is going to be, in addition to trying to figure out which of these young kids are the ones that you put into the column where it's like, these are the guys that we can build around. Those are, I think, the two things that are going to be happening for San Jose this season. Is hope the rookies do well, hope the young kids do well, but also hope that some of the vets do well, so that you can get something back for them at the trade deadline.
Yeah, and then that seems like that's likely what they're going to do. And at the same time, it's the other thing that you kind of have to think of if you're San Jose are a couple of questions involving guys that, have been franchise mainstays for such a long time. Logan Couture, Tomas Hertl, Mark-Edward Vlasic. There's a lot of players on this team that if you're San Jose, maybe less so Hertl, but with Couture and Vlasic, you're probably thinking like, is there a way to get out of this sooner? Is there a way to kind of wrap this up, move in another direction? Maybe these guys, we can kind of pitch to bigger teams, be like, hey, here's a, just we'll eat some salary, if you're willing to give us maybe just a little bit of something just to have this guy, as sort of a locker room playoff run kind of guy. I would imagine that. And the other question is, what do you do with Tomas Hertl? Because he just signed a big contract not too long ago. Clearly the best player on the team. And he, it's going to be interesting. He turns 30-year-old this year. By the time the Sharks are good again, is he going to provide enough value for the Sharks, gearing up to whenever the next time they want to make their playoff run is? Is Tomas Hertl somebody that if you're the Sharks, you start wondering aloud? It's like, okay, what can we get for this guy? Maybe is there another, is there a package that includes a shot at another up and coming building block that we can have?
Hertl is signed for $8.1375 million until the end of the 2029-2030 season.
Seems like a lot.
That's a large contract. And so while San Jose will not be racking up the wins, they will be racking up scouting reports on players throughout their organization to see who's in, who's out, and to answer the question, what exactly would you say it is that you do here? So we'll see what happens with them. By process of elimination, you probably can guess that the final two teams that we'll discuss next week are the Anaheim Ducks and the Chicago Blackhawks. So keep an eye out for that, plus the start of the NHL season, by making sure you're subscribed to the Locked On NHL podcast on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms, so you don't miss out on any breaking NHL news, as well as all of the Locked On Wild experts that we have throughout the course of the week, bringing you state of truly the best coverage throughout the NHL here on Locked On NHL. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.